Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic episode.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It was called Ad Astra per Astera, which means through hardships to the stars, and which apparently was the Starfleet motto before the Federation came to exist. Anyway, as the episode starts, we get a flashback to Una's childhood where her parents were discussing her situation at a time when she apparently was injured. And they didn't know what to do because they didn't want her genetics to get discovered by, like, a doctor, for example. In the present, Una's being presented with plea options by the prosecutor, aka Pike's girlfriend, who offers a dishonorable discharge in exchange for no prison time and sweeping everything under the rug so that no one will know that an Elorian was able to climb the ranks of Starfleet, as Captain Pike shows up to the office of the lawyer that they both want to represent Una, which is on a planet where the atmosphere is not breathable for non-augmented humans. So he's struggling with an oxygen device that runs out of juice or whatever, at which point he's finally let in to see the lawyer who adjusts the air in her office so that he can breathe. Pike pleads with the lawyer to help Una, but she resists because of how the Federation has treated Illyrians. And when he explains that he knows that they were done wrong by the Federation and pleads with her to help, again, she still resists, but does agree to look at the case file, and then does in fact show up to see Una. Through these scenes, we learn that there's some particular beef between this lawyer and Una over something that happened in the past, which is unspecified. The prosecutor, meanwhile, goes to visit Pike to read him the riot act over Una rejecting the plea deal now that that lawyer is on her side, and tells him that even getting her that plea deal was difficult and that now the judge advocate general is looking into the case personally. It turns out that the prosecution decided to up the charges against Una in light of her rejection of the plea deal to include charges that carry a penalty of 20 years on a penal colony. La'an sets the lawyer up in Una's quarters on the Enterprise and tells her that she might have knowledge of some illegally gathered evidence against Una, which would probably get her case tossed. Captain Pike's girlfriend visits him again to explain that he really shouldn't take the stand in defense of Una because the prosecution would turn the tables on him over the fact that he knew she was Illyrian and didn't report it for at least some period of time, however short. Apparently, Spock doesn't really care for a fellow Vulcan who is with the prosecution. La'an orders Uhura to supply her with all of the ship's officers' personal logs so that she can try to figure out who turned in Una, but Uhura refuses and reminds her that she can't do that without an order from Starfleet Command, and that they'll have to figure out what they need to figure out some other way. When the trial starts and the judge introduces the panel of judges, she references one of the members as being from Space Command, as a separate entity from Starfleet, which is a throwback to very early Star Trek when that's what Starfleet was called. Admiral April is called as the first witness, and when he takes the stand, it resembles the same type of chair that was used in court scenes on the original series, so I thought that was cool. When pressed, the Admiral admits that he would not have sponsored Una's application to Starfleet if he had known that she was genetically modified. When Una's lawyer asks April about General Order 1, now called the Prime Directive, as it relates to a couple of different missions that he went on when he was captain of the Enterprise, and about how he violated that order, which she seizes on. She persists with this line of questioning so much that it makes Starfleet and the Federation look really bad, so the court kicks all of April's testimony out of the record, including the part that was bad for Una. The Doctor, La'an, and Spock all give glowing character witness testimonials for Una that were quite moving, actually. It turns out that La'an thinks that she may have inadvertently outed Una by recording a personal log about how she was feeling when she found out that her friend and mentor had lied to her, as well as that she's afraid she'll become dangerous because she carries her family's genetic mutations. But Una's lawyer assures her that she's no different than anybody else in terms of her ability to do both good and bad. Una takes the stand and talks about why she joined Starfleet, knowing she could be discovered, and her childhood, which included hiding who she was, along with her family. She also talks about what happened to her best friend's cousin when it was found out that he was augmented, and how her people were persecuted in the name of anti-modification laws and anti-modification sentiment in the Federation, as well as about how people wouldn't even provide services for them, including doctors, and how she almost died from the injury that we saw in the opening scene because of it. And part of her story seems to touch on what happened between her and the lawyer, though again, nothing specific is disclosed. It turns out that Una turned herself into the authorities because she was sick of living a lie. The Vulcan prosecutor asks to know when Pike found out about her status, and Una basically rats him out, giving a date that was 4 months before she was arrested, which is weird because it didn't seem like 4 months went by from the time she had a conversation with him about it and the time she was arrested at the end of season one. So, did he know before that conversation? Like, where did the 4 months happen? I wasn't clear on that. Anyway, Una's lawyer invokes Starfleet Code 8514, which is basically their asylum code, which says that any being who requests asylum because they've been persecuted or feared for their life or whatever is to be granted asylum, and that Starfleet captains have the authority to do so. As such, the court finds Una not guilty, recognizing that while the law must stay the law, they have to judge each case individually. And of course, they have to follow their own laws, specifically Code 8514, which basically covered Una because she joined Starfleet to escape persecution and, a threat to her life. And she disclosed her status to Captain Pike as a way to request asylum. As Una is welcomed back aboard Enterprise, she and her friend seem to reconcile, but we never do find out exactly what happened between them. And that's where the episode ends. So, my episode breakdown does not do justice to the very emotional and very poignant scenes that take place during the trial. But this episode was fantastic, and it strongly honors the tradition of other fantastic courtroom-based episodes of various Star Trek series over the years, specifically The Measure of a Man, for example, from TNG Season 1. Of course, the whole episode is an allegory for things that have happened and that sadly are still happening in real life. Persecution of Jewish people, persecution of gay people and others in the LGBT community, the persecution of people of color in various places on the globe, even things like discrimination against women. And it demonstrates yet again, as Star Trek has long done, how all of those things are wrong. And for the life of me, I don't know why this episode was not the season premiere. Like, we left off on a cliffhanger of her being arrested. Why didn't they just go right into this episode? Like, not only because that's what makes narrative sense, but because this episode is fucking fantastic and very much worthy of season premiere status, which cannot at all be said about the actual season premiere, which kind of sucked. So I'm just confused by that. There had to be some logic to it, but it escapes me what it could be. Maybe we'll find out someday. But this episode is exactly what Star Trek is supposed to be. It did exactly what Star Trek is supposed to do: highlight and go over issues that humanity struggles with and remind people that discrimination is wrong. Star Trek has a long history of doing that through various types of episodes, not just courtroom episodes. And this episode totally lives up to that history and is just what Star Trek should always be. And this is why the episodic format works so much better, I think, than the serialized format, because you can cover a single issue in an hour in a way that really hits home, and then you're on to the next thing, and it's not clouded over by the more soap opera-esque aspect of an overarching story that are designed to keep that story going for the course of a season, which is why Discovery is so terrible, because it isn't episodic. And, people are going to say, oh, well, DS9 was serialized and it was fantastic. Yeah, because they managed to always include a B plot or an alternate A plot in every episode that did the kinds of things that this episode did, which were allegorical in nature and examined the human condition. So I liked it a lot. I would quibble with little moments, maybe, Like, I don't know why they had the scene where they showed the Doctor and Ortega talking about how Spock seemed ill at ease with his fellow Vulcan. I don't know why the scene was in there. I'm not really sure why they had La'an go to Uhura and ask her to do an illegal thing. I don't know that I would have put those scenes in there. But they don't take anything away from there, so they don't hurt the episode. But other than that, I think this episode was all aces in terms of the story. Now, before I go, I do want to talk about the dress uniforms that the non-admiral rank officers wear. Well, the admirals too, I guess, but they're a different color. They're gray, and so they're entirely new. But anyway, I want to say a few words about the dress uniforms in this episode. In fact, I've already said the words that I want to say about the dress uniforms in another video that like 3 people saw, because it contained a couple of minutes of this courtroom scene, and it was initially blocked under copyright guidelines until I disputed the claim and then appealed a rejection of the claim and won. And the video was allowed to go back up. But the relevance of the material had faded by then and nobody watched it. So I'm just going to take a clip from that video and put it here so that you can hear my thoughts on these dress uniforms that they use in this episode, because I have questions, or at least one question. So just check out the clip. One thing I want to know about the footage that kind of disappoints me is that they changed the Starfleet dress uniforms. Now, the dress uniform from the original series that we saw in a couple of episodes obviously are being worn in a time that comes after the time that this court martial is taking place in. So they could have changed. It makes sense because time moves forward and changes happen over time moving forward. So it's not like, it's impossible for it to be consistent. It can be perfectly consistent. But I always thought those uniforms were fine the way they were. And I don't understand why they made changes to them. Now, they kept a lot of stuff. It's got the single line going down the front, the collar that goes around it in gold, or I guess silver now. And they kept the little chest thing that, the multicolored chest thing. Not really a badge, it's like a collection of their medals, I guess. And, the colors, the solid color. And so that's cool. But they added epaulets to the shoulders and they added piping, it looks like. Why? 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 It just irritates me. There is no reason to do it. Like I said, it happens that it doesn't contradict the canon, because the uniforms could have evolved by the time of TOS to lose the epaulets and the piping, so that's fine. But I still don't understand why. Why can they not keep anything the way it was in the original series? Why? Why? It just irritates the crap out of me. And I don't think they look as nice. I think the epaulets look goofy. That's what you call those, right? Epaulets, which I think have their rank stripes on them. I think that's what they are. Why? It just annoys the crap out of me. It really does. So yeah, I don't know. It's said that the 25% rule has been debunked, that it doesn't exist, that the producers are not required to make things 25% different than they were in the original series on this show. But it sure seems like it's true, because why else would they change perfectly serviceable dress uniforms? Why? Other than they felt like it, which I would hate to think is the reason, because that just makes the costumers and anybody involved in the change an asshole. Just all there is to it. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the episode. I thought it was fantastic. I hope they do more episodes like this. I have no idea why it wasn't the season premiere, because it should have been. And I have issues with the dress uniforms that they showed, which I hope never show up again. I hope the next time the crew has to be in dress uniforms, they go, hey, look, they've now changed into the ones that the crew was using years later during the events of the original series, because I don't like them. But that's really it. I'm going to get out of here. I will be back to review next week's episode once it is released. Until I return, as always, I wish you peace and long life.